Hi guys, it's Mrs. H. I wanted to go ahead and get started on characteristics of life. So this is our first lesson, our first unit. So what are we looking at? So we're going to be looking at what biology is, what living and non-living things are, and here are some key vocabulary, although there are more than just that on our vocabulary table. So the first thing I want to look at is what is biology and what are some of those areas of study. So when we talk about biology, we're really talking about what is this? What do we study in biology? And it really is a very big and broad makeup of science, and it actually is broken down into several different smaller subcategories. So biology is the study of life, and that looks at how things grow, where did they come from, how have they evolved, and how do these living things interact with each other and with non-living things. So, four areas or concepts that we look at within biology is cell theory. So, your cell makeup, what can cells do, what processes are formed by cells. We're looking at evolution, so the change in species over time. We can look at genetics. So, what is that DNA and how does DNA result in your makeup and what organisms look like? And then lastly, we can look at homeostasis. So, how can organisms maintain? Why aren't we all exploding? Why are we all, have a common average body temperature? So, those are the four different concepts. And then we look at, with that, we can actually look at our different topics within that. So other classes you can take. So we have ecology, we have biochemistry, cell biology. And so biology can even be broken down into further classes, if you would. And there's actually 10 others. So when I did my research and I went back to school, I majored in ecology. And so I looked at how do living organisms interact with each other and within a system. And so it was just one small part of biology. And so, to better understand biology, we can really dive into these things. So, biochemistry, notice bio and chemistry, so the chemical reactions of the living things. Cellular biology is how do cells function and what do they look like. Evolutionary biology is where do these species come from? How have we changed? What are some common ancestors? Then we have microbiology, and so those are the small living things like bacteria and fungus and even viruses. We have immunology, which is looking at our immune system and how our immune systems protect our body. We look at genetics, so those genes and DNA and how those are passed on from offspring to offspring. We look at our phylogeny, and that would be looking at the processes and mechanisms within our biology. So your anatomy and physiology. So physiology is that second part of anatomy. We have zoology, and that's the study of animals. Botany is the study of plants. And then lastly, we have ecology, so how those all organisms work together. So we're going to be looking at little bits of every single one of these aspects in biology because we're actually looking at the big picture in biology. So in order for us to move on, I want you guys to take a couple minutes and see if you can answer these questions. So we'll pause here. And so then how did we do? How did we do? Did we do okay? How are your answers? Let's go ahead then and look at what is life. So in order to study biology, we really need to look at the organisms that we're going to be looking at. So all living things actually carry out biological processes, and they're very specific biological processes that we identify. If you're non-living, you cannot, you can't do those things. Those processes you're unable to. You might be able to do a couple of them, but maybe not all of them. And that really is the fundamental difference between those living and non-living things. So when we look at non-living things, they're unable to carry out all of those biological processes. Now, there is another word that we talk about is dead, and dead implies that there was once a point in time in that organism's history that they were able to perform all the biological processes, just so we can clarify that. So when we're defining life, we can actually look at the processes that these organisms have. And so we can look at nutrition, we can look at growth, reproduction, excretion, sensitivity, respiration, and movement. And when we break these down, oops, double slide, sorry about that. So then when we break those 7 processes down, what we're really looking at is these characteristics. So what characteristics do all living things have? This is the nuts and bolts of all of this. So we look at living objects, an organism. They're made of cell. They're able to respond to a stimulus, which is where that movement comes from. They're able to grow and develop. They're able to reproduce, and then obtain and use energy, which is that respiration, nutrition, and excretion. So let's really dive deep into what these characteristics are. So first characteristics. Cells are the most basic unit of life, and all living things are made up of these cells. It's the smallest part that is able to perform those life processes. They're very diverse and they're very broad, and there's actually 2 types. There's prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So our eukaryotes, and sorry, my face is blocking eukaryotes. So our eukaryotes and our prokaryotes, the differences here are that, that prokaryotes don't have a nucleus. They don't have any bound organelles. They divide by binary fission. They're unicellular, so they're really small. They do have a cell wall, and these are usually our bacteria. So on contrast, our eukaryotes, these are our plants and animals. Some of them do have cell walls, not all of them do. They are both unicellular and multicellular. They will actually divide with a more complicated cell division called mitosis, and they do have a nucleus, and they do have that bound organelle. So that second characteristic of life, so besides being made of cells, what else do they have in common? They also are able to respond to a stimulus. So all organisms can detect and respond to an outside their surroundings. And so a response is going to allow an organism to survive. And so animals actually have developed organs in order for them to be able to respond and detect their environment and send messages from parts of their body to their brain so that they can respond to the stimulus in order for survival. And so that's really what our brain does. It helps us use our 5 senses so that we can survive. So different organisms will respond differently. So animals, we use our limbs to respond to our environment. We might, put our hands up to, block a ball from hitting us in the face, or we might use our legs to run away from that, maybe a predator. Those are direct movements, and then there's also indirect movements. So then when a plant will actually respond to an insect near them, they'll actually have a response to that, and that would be an indirect movement. We don't really think about plants as responding, but they do in fact respond. If you look at plants out in a yard, you will notice that all of the leaves in that yard are actually going to be facing the sun because they need the leaves to be pointing towards the sun so that they can do photosynthesis at optimal levels. So they are in fact responding to the stimulus of the sun. A next characteristic is homeostasis. And so homeostasis is having an internal body balance, if you would. And so we have blood pressure and we have temperature, and those are things the human body regulates in order for us to stay balanced. But humans are not the only ones that do this. All species are able to do this. And there's actually things that have like a negative feedback loop or a positive feedback loop. And so when, it's really cold out, we'll actually shiver. So that would be something that would be a negative feedback loop or an example of that. So another characteristic of a living thing is obtaining and using energy. So we all will will require energy because we need it in order to do all of these life processes. And so this is actually done with a chemical reaction. So all of the chemical reactions in an organism is actually called metabolism. So you've probably heard of somebody saying, "Oh, I have really good metabolism," or "Oh, my metabolism is really bad." And that's actually what they're saying is, how are you able to break down a chemical reaction in order to get that energy? So if you have a really high metabolism, you put the food in your mouth and you can do the chemical reaction really quickly. And so you're going to use up that energy really quickly. If you have a slower metabolism, that means that your body is taking longer to break those things down. And all organisms do this. What you're seeing here on the slide is actually cellular respiration. This is how eukaryotic cells will actually obtain and use the energy. And we'll look at this more closely later this trimester, and this is actually cellular respiration. Now, not all organisms will actually obtain their energy the same way. This is where those autotrophs and heterotrophs come from. So an autotroph means that they don't need to rely on any other organism for their food, that they can actually make something called glucose themselves and then break that down for the energy. Where we as humans and dogs and cats and cows and what have you, these are all heterotrophs because they actually have to eat their food in order to get that energy to break it down. There's actually different categories of heterotrophs. That's where herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, and actually decomposers come from. A decomposer actually will break down the organic matter near them outside their body and then absorb it into their body, where I can't just put my hand on food and then the food will be absorbed. I have to actually eat it. So that would be something that's different between, an omnivore or say a decomposer. They don't actually digest the food within their system. Actually, the food is broken down outside. So excretion. So after we use all this stuff and all of this food, there's a leftover waste material, and that's where excretion is. So how do we get through that? And again, whether we're unicellular or multicellular, this all needs to be done. When I breathe, we don't think of breathing as actually an excretion, but it is. We're actually getting rid of our CO2 that we no longer need in our body. And it is actually, in fact, a form of excretion. So again, getting rid of that waste from the body. All living things will possess this as well. So our lungs, our large intestine, our kidneys, our skin, these are all organs that are actually responsible for excretion in animals. And all animals have this, or not all animals, most animals that have organs, these organs are designed to help perform one of life's processes, specifically lungs, large intestine, kidneys, and skin are all organs that are used for specifically excretion. So another characteristic of living thing is growth and development. So growth is we're just going to increase in size. We're going to increase in mass. Where development is we're actually fine-tuning skills. We're getting better at it. And there's some controversy of whether or not development occurs in all organisms. But think about when you were a kid, the skills that you have now are different from then when you were in, say, second grade. So you're able to do more things. So you've developed. And so growth and development is, again, a characteristic of all living things, not just humans. So our little itty bitty amoeba would be exhibiting this as well. What else can all living things do? All living things are able to produce new offspring. Now, again, how we exhibit this is going to be different. So we have asexual, in which results in an offspring that is genetic makeup is identical to the original. And then with sexual reproduction, we actually have variations in our offspring. So again, we have reproduction, the ability to produce offspring, which is exhibited in all living things, but how we do it is again different. So let's go ahead and do another comprehension check. So let's go ahead. Can you decide whether this is living, non-living, and dead? And let's actually take that a step further. Why would you classify it as living? Why would you classify it as non-living? And again, why would you classify it as dead? So let's go ahead and take a couple minutes to think about this. So how'd you do? I hope that we have a good understanding of what biology is, what the fields of biology are, and again, those characteristics of life. So, what do all living things have in common? They're made of cells, they're able to respond to a stimulus, they are able to reproduce, they will grow and develop. And which one did I forget? Maintain homeostasis. Sorry, totally went blank. So, all living things will exhibit these characteristics. So, we want to remember when we're talking about life, they need to have those characteristics. So, I hope this helped. See you later, guys. Bye.